Hello, welcome to the Defence Side podcast on day 40 of the Iran war. We're now allegedly in a 2-week ceasefire. Who knows whether that's going to hold or not, where it's going to end up, but it's definitely throwing up lots of important questions for UK defence, global defence, the Middle East, plenty to talk about. I mean, we're in this sort of twilight zone of this ceasefire. Perhaps it's an appropriate time to take a pause and look at the UK contribution to this conflict. So far, we've had the RAF, the Royal Navy, the British Army, Royal Artillery Air Defenders out in the Middle East. The RAF and the RAF regiment claim to have shot down over 100 Iranian drones, 110 drones, according to the Prime Minister the other day. That's shot down by Typhoons, E-5s, or ground-based air defence. Now, the one service that seems to have not covered itself in glory so far in this conflict is the Royal Navy. HMS Dragon, the saga of the Type 45 destroyer, has filled front pages of our newspapers for several weeks, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better, Francis.
Sadly not. Now, let's just get on the record straight away. A lot of people have taken, I think, slightly over negative views of what has happened with the fact that HMS Dragon has had to depart the front line to go for services, which we will come across later. Stuff happens, you have to accept that. But I think some of the everything is entirely bad is the wrong line to take. Let us now go through, and we both discussed this previously, the Royal Navy, the MOD's statement about HMS Dragon, that she has disappeared to an unknown base, well, we've heard it's Suda Bay, Crete, for scheduled maintenance, taking on provisions and optimization of systems. Now, the latter, we're assuming, is, for the sake of argument, someone has tweaked the software of the Samson radar, or maybe the fire controls codes for the Sea Scepter missiles, or Aster, and is that a good thing to do? Of course it's a good thing to do. The only question is, why would you need to be tied up alongside to do that? Surely you could fly out reps from BAE Systems or MBDA to the ship and they can load the software. As, by the way, happened in the Falklands with Seawolf, you had Marconi technicians under the cabinets with screwdrivers tweaking the radar as the Skyhawks came in to San Carlos Sound. But both of us, Tim, have been going, sorry, you go in to take on board provisions, right? And I'm assuming provisions means edible stuff. Dragon only left Portsmouth, what, Tim, 3.5 weeks ago?
Middle of March, yes.
Right. Are we actually saying that a Type 45 can't carry the provisions for even 1 month at sea? Is that what we're saying? And weren't there other places she stopped off at?
Well, the word on the street is that she's having trouble with her osmosis plant to convert seawater into water. And she's having to go into Suda Bay to get that fixed, which is a pretty major problem. It limits your time at sea if your freshwater conversion plant doesn't work, which raises more questions about the material state of this ship, whether she was actually ready to go on this deployment at such short notice.
And how long was Dragon in maintenance in Portsmouth?
A very long time, several months.
Was it 6-7 months? And we all know that when the flag drops, sometimes you have to set to sea and fix operational defects at sea. Look back at the Falklands. There were ships leaving Portsmouth, leaving Devonport, which were, as it were, patently unfit to go to. No, they weren't dangerous, but they had so many deficiencies. And so, yeah, when desperation calls, you just go with it. That absolutely no problems. But something like, surely, the water plant, after such a long period in maintenance, did no one check it ever in that maintenance period? Surely it's got to be on a checklist. And I come back to the provisioning with pictures coming from different online sources. Dragon docked in Gibraltar, also docked in Suda Bay to pick up some extra stuff. And possibly, where was it you heard?
Maybe Lanka.
She might have gone, maybe Lanka. So on that basis, if Dragon left Portsmouth, in best sense, at top speed because it needed to get in theatre and the fridges weren't full, the storerooms weren't full, there were 3 opportunities to fill up the provisions. So there is a question mark there. And again, scheduled maintenance. So in less than a month after a deep maintenance, well, a relatively deep maintenance period, you have to have scheduled maintenance, which requires a dock. Now, as you said, Tim, the talk is of the osmosis, the water conversion plant. But again, yeah, this sort of slightly doesn't make sense. And also, the what was it that the MOD press release said about the ship's readiness while she is at this unspecified port, Tim?
Yes, it said she would be ready for operations if needed while in port, which is morons.
And the suggestion is that she is still at high readiness, capable of undertaking her missions. Well, if the mission is protecting the service personnel and their families at RAF Akrotiri principally, and then our Britain's allies in the region, last time we checked, Suda Bay is about 700 kilometres from Akrotiri, and it'd be 1,000 kilometres from maybe 900 kilometres from the coast of Israel. And the last I looked, Aster 30, good missile, has about 150 kilometre range. You ain't doing no anti-ballistic missile duties at 700 kilometres.
Well, if HMS Dragon's trials and tribulations weren't enough, we have the saga of RFA Lyme Bay, which has now gone back to Gibraltar, allegedly having to go into dry dock for unspecified repairs, maintenance, conversion work, whatever it is. But again, that's not a sign of a fleet at high readiness.
And let's put it this way, the phrase "and has gone into a dry dock" never has a good connotation. If it's minor maintenance, it can be done with the ship, whatever ship, still in the water. And how long do we reckon Lyme Bay was at sea in the Eastern Mediterranean, but B, in maintenance in Gibraltar before that, Tim?
Oh, she was there at Christmas and was tied up at Gibraltar Naval Base for January, February time. So she's been a long time in Gibraltar, where in theory she could have had repairs and maintenance done.
And actually, if memory serves me well, one of the reasons Lyme Bay was not brought back to the UK was the cost of fuel to actually sail her back to the UK. Sadly, these seem to be signs, which you can see across the Royal Navy fleet, of ignoring maintenance or skimping and saving on maintenance, which end up with huge problems down the line. It's penny wise, pound foolish.
Well, if that wasn't enough, we just heard the announcement by the RMT union this week that the crew of RFA Lyme Bay have gone on strike in Gibraltar, and there's pictures on the RMT Twitter of the crew manning a picket line in front of the ship as she's docked in Gibraltar, which is sends another negative message about the readiness of the Royal Navy and the RFA.
And do we have any idea, Tim, of how long this strike will last?
No idea. But it's part of a long-running dispute between the MOD and its RFA workforce over pay and conditions stretching back several years. The seafarers, the officers both have different unions, but they're claiming that their pay has fallen behind their compatriots in the civil merchant fleet, and the Ministry of Defence is dragging its feet about a pay offer. They've had protracted negotiations which have gone nowhere, and that this situation just seems acrimonious and not very conducive to good industrial relations, which is what you need at a time of crisis.
And I suppose the sort of set of questions you're left asking is, right, over the decades I've dealt with the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. They have provided sterling service to the Royal Navy, to use the phrase shoulder to shoulder. Right. On that basis, if they are shoulder to shoulder with the Royal Navy, and frequently you've had Royal Navy personnel on board Royal Fleet Auxiliary ships and so forth, why don't you pay the RFA the same rate as you pay the sailors and officers of the Royal Navy? Not even the rate you would pay for the civil marine. If they are there in grey ships with close-in weapon systems, armed helicopters and so forth, because the corollary is, if the model of the RFA doesn't work, the only solution left is the Royal Navy takes it over, in which case you're going to be paying the crew manning those ships Royal Navy rates. Why doesn't the MOD bite the bullet and just say, look, if we are going to continue with the RFA model, they just have to be paid the same as the Royal Navy?
I mean, I've talked to the MOD and the members of the union and their representatives, and they have both over recent years tried to come to a solution, and various offers have been on the table, but these seem to have been torpedoed when they get to the Treasury, who doesn't want to set precedents for civil servants, because RFA personnel are civil servants, and doesn't want to set precedents that other parts of the civil service could use to better their terms and conditions and pay. So it's a poisonous circle of doom that the RFA seems to be stuck in.
Well, and I would just say in terms of these, so we don't want to set a precedent. When someone working for DEFRA in Whitehall or one of the regional offices has to face the prospect of being on board a ship hit by an anti-ship missile and with prospect of death and mutilation, then they can demand the same sort of treatment as someone in the RFA. It oughtn't to be that difficult to explain it to the civil service that the RFA and some of the other civil service parts of the MOD, they are not the same as civil servants in the other departments. There is risk. How many people working for the Department of Transport will be away for 4 months at the time when they're working? I suspect precious few.
I mean, even if it's not in a, we call a war zone, only, I think in January, a member of the RFA was swept over off one of the ships in the Atlantic and was reported missing, never been found since. So it's just dangerous work manning these ships.
Yeah. And so on that basis, yes, notionally, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary are civil servants, but in terms of the risks they take, they are alongside the Royal Navy pretty much whenever they're deployed. And so they should be treated differently. And I suspect it's the old one with the Treasury. Oh my God, if they were to be treated like the Royal Navy, the pensions bill. Last time I looked, there were about 1,600 Royal Fleet Auxiliary. They're short a number of personnel. The impact on the government finances of giving MOD-style pensions to the RFA is pathetically small. And to repeat, if the current RFA model doesn't work, the only solution, unless we get rid of all the RFA flotilla, is to bring it inside the Royal Navy, and in which case you will have all of those pay and pensions anyway. So it just strikes me as to repeat, penny wise, pound foolish.
Which is, a pretty depressing state of affairs. One part of the armed forces that seems to be rising up above and beyond, to coin the phrase, is the RAF Regiment and their air defence forces. Their counter-UAS wing, based at RAF Leaming, they have detachments across the Middle East and appear to be engaged on a daily basis, shooting down drones, attacking bases in Iraq, Kuwait, and they seem to be doing sterling service. Their new Rapid Century air defence system, firing the Martlet missile, seems to be working and was brought into service very quickly and is delivering in droves on the front line. The Royal Artillery air defenders, they've also stepped up. They are now in Bahrain. They have a contingent on Cyprus, supported by the Royal Marine Air Defence Troop as well. And the Royal Artillery and RAF are in the process of deploying the Sky Sabre system to Saudi Arabia as we speak. So British Air Defence seems to be stepping up across the region, putting its best foot forward, so to speak. Now, the question has to be two things. How long can they keep this up? There's not very many. We only have one Air Defence regiment with HVM Starstreak, one regiment with Sky Sabre, and only two RF regiment squadrons in a counter-UAS role. So their ability to rotate is limited. And also, do they have anything left at home if we have a drone threat, air defence threat in the UK, as we've seen over the past couple of months across Europe, these drone scares at airports and ports, Russian hybrid warfare threats? Is this part of the armed forces that needs to be grown in size permanently?
Well, let's try and break this down, because there are so many different threads. As we both know, there are only 5 Sky Sabre launch vehicles. One of them, last heard, was still in the Falklands, which is what these 5 vehicles were originally bought for, Air Defence the Falklands. It is likely you have to keep one in Thorney Island for training and that type of thing, if you are going to have any chance of rotating. There used to be one in Poland, protecting the logistics base for supporting Ukraine. So on that basis, the UK might have 2 Sky Sabre launch units ready. Now, the Saudis are not going to turn it down, but I think if you look at what Italy and France have deployed out to the Gulf region, they deployed the Sampti Mamba based on Aster. 2 launch units is a little bit limited, but that's all the UK has. And yeah, Tim, you say what's left in the cupboard with the threat to the UK. Now, the official line is Britain is absolutely safe. There are no threats to the UK from anyone anywhere, and all the necessary steps have been taken to protect the UK. I would just, which we both know from a variety of sources is not true, And actually, Ben Wallace, former Defence Secretary on Times Radio, gave a very eloquent reason why the UK is not safe. Questions about why he was not able to do much under his watch, we can deal with later and on. But the Prime Minister of Finland, Alexander Stubb, addressing Chatham House about 2 weeks ago, very interesting quote where he said, "The threat to London is the same as the threat to Helsinki." Right? Now, he was talking specifically about Russian threat, but bear in mind, Helsinki is it even 200 kilometers from the border with Russia? And we are from Russia, as opposed to Kaliningrad. The UK is nearly 2,000 kilometers. It is interesting that someone of his standing, and he's, for what it's worth, a Trump whisperer, just is basically trying to tell the UK, you need to wake up about air defense. You are not defending yourself. And I've been brought to mind more and more, and this may not be the best comparison, but in the film The Battle of Britain, so what, very late 60s, early 70s, there is a scene early on, the fall of France and so forth, and the Chief of Fighter Command, Chief Marshal Dowding, is asked, send more Spitfires to France. And he says, no, if I do that, there is nothing to defend Britain. And I have a suspicion that with the number of Martlet, HVM Starstreak, and now Sky Sabre sent out to the region, which is necessary, by the way, I'm not doubting we need to deploy it, I suspect there is the square root of FA left to defend the UK in case of threat. And anyway, it's sitting in barracks. And coming back just to the overall ground-based air defence picture, it fascinates me that the army still thinks that ground-based air defence for the UK is beneath it. They shouldn't have to bother about it because it's basically for rents. If they would take it seriously, if the MOD were to take ground-based air defence seriously of the UK, let alone deployed forces, it should be on the same budget importance as the deterrent.
Well, it comes back to, of course, the infamous DIP, Defence Investment Plan, which is yet to report. MOD ministers, spokesmen keep saying that there is a budget for £1 billion for ground-based air defence. But because of the deadlock over the DIP, this money has not been released. Now, we've seen over the past couple of...
And Tim, actually, what you have to remember is if you look at SDR and subsequent statements, that billion is not just ground-based air defence, it is also cyber. And correlating that with other statements, potentially to 2030, 500 to 600 million of that billion is for cyber, not for ground-based air defence. And we've both been told by MOD sources that this side of 2030, any money spent on ground-based air defence will be spent more on some new radar systems and so forth, which are needed. I am not querying that. But we've both heard the effectors, missiles, that's something for the 2030s, which, well, going back, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the then Chief of the General Staff, General Sir Patrick Sanders, spoke about the 1937 moment, the moment when the UK went, oh God, we now need to re-arm. Well, we are 2.5, 3 years later, looking at these things on a horizon to 2030, 2035, that's just too late.
I mean, we've seen in the past month or so, the order for the new medium helicopters has been approved, breaking that out of DIP. We've seen the same thing with a tranche of £800 million for the GCAP Tempest fighter program. So the dam has broken. The sort of mythical ring fence around DIP money has gone. So this might be the moment where somebody's got to take it by the nettle and say, we need this stuff now.
Sadly, Tim, I think the Treasury will treat NMH as the Prime Minister gave in to unreasonable lobbying, and that GCAP was, from a Treasury point of view, regrettable that they had no choice but to give bridging money. They should have been signing up for about $2.5 billion, covering 3 or 4 years. They've given the barest minimum they can. The Treasury, I suspect, will not accept those two examples as the fact that the dam has broken. I think they will say some water has come over the top of the dam, but the dam is still intact and they will not give way.
This comes down to really how long this crisis in the Middle East lasts. Because, as we say, we've got almost all of the UK air defence capability is out the door in the Middle East now. We're at 6 weeks. If this goes on to 3 months, 4, 5, 6 months, something will have to give. That this is just not a sustainable level of boots on the ground for the air defence community of the UK. So, we're at a crunch point.
Absolutely. And then going back to World War II, and I think there are some very, very pertinent comparisons. The commander, basically, home defense anti-aircraft artillery, General Frederick Pyle, he actually wrote a book in, I think it was 1938, which just said, we don't have enough anti-aircraft artillery, and wrote a couple of papers saying, if you have asked me to defend Britain from the ground, he accepted fighter command existed and so forth, but even fighter command, and by the way, General Pyle and Air Chief Marshal Dowding had excellent relations, so there was not the inter-service rivalry that you might expect. But actually, one of the things that happened, and this actually affected my old TA battalion, infantry, they were converted to anti-air gunners. And if you were to sit down with General Sir Ailey Walker, Chief of General Staff today, my one would be, which regular infantry battalions are you now going to convert to artillery, anti-air artillery, and which TA infantry battalions and or logistics or signals or transport, doesn't matter. Which of those will you convert to anti-air, ground-based air defense? Because we are down to, I would argue, not just the barest minimum of GBAD regiments and or squadrons for the RAF regiment. I think we are below what is necessary, and there is a need to boost. In the short term, there is no money for, can we recruit an extra 4,000 troops? No money for that in the short term. The only solution to achieve this will be converting existing units.
That's a sobering thought for us to conclude this edition of the Defence Side podcast. I'm sure there's plenty more to talk about as the crisis in the Middle East continues, whether the ceasefire holds or war breaks out again. There's definitely a feel that the world has changed.